time just to say we are in Matthew 14 tonight, so you can study right along with us. If you don't know this, if you're on our website, click on the Bible on the left-hand side, and you can. It's a YouVersion Bible. You can use that or have your own Bible. Right.
It's true. It's true. So, yep. So we're in Matthew 14, and it's got about 36 verses, and so we're gonna be studying some good stories this evening. And last chapter 13 was very long, and we handled a whole bunch of miracles. And Matthew always likes to share about those miracles because he's really trying to prove to the Jewish people. This book was written to the Jewish people. He's really trying to point to the fact that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, and I love that. So he never hesitates to share the things that point to him being the Messiah. So let's go ahead in chapter 14, and let's go ahead and do some reading. So chapter 14, verse 1. At that time, Herod the tetrarch heard the news about Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work with him." For when Herod had John arrested, he bound him, and he put him in prison because of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Although Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded John as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod, so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Having been prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." Although he was grieved, the king commanded it to be given because of his oaths and because of his dinner guests. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and reported to Jesus.
It's an interesting way he starts out. It starts out with
Flashback.
Yeah, a flashback, and then he just goes right into the story. It's like if you don't pay attention, you're into the current situation from the flashback. So it's really neat way he's writing it. All right, where are you going from there?
Well, Herod was he was one of the 4 rulers over the 4 districts of Palestine. His territory included the regions of Galilee and Perea. He was the son of Herod the Great, who ordered the killing of the babies in Bethlehem. Remember when Jesus was born. Also known as Herod Antipas, he heard Jesus' case before Jesus' crucifixion. And so, just so you know which Herod this is, obviously there's more than one in the Bible. And so just wanted to point out the fact that this is not the one that ordered the killing of all male children when Jesus was born.
Yeah.
This is...
There's several Herods, and you just, as you read the stories, you just start making note of which one you're reading about, because there's many years in between these. So yeah.
Well, Jesus is 30, 31, 32 here at this point. So he's in his early 30s. So so this is that Herod's son. And so his so Philip, what verse does it talk about? Verse 3. So Philip is Herod's half-brother, and he was another one of the rulers for Palestine. He had his own areas that he got to cover. His territories were Iturea and Trachonitis, northeast of the Sea of Galilee. And so Philip had a wife. Her name was Herodias. Here she is here in the Bible. And Herodias left Philip to live with Herod Antipas, this Herod that we're talking about, and so that's what he was saying when he was saying it's wrong for you to have her. John the Baptist was saying, Herod, you can't take your brother's wife for your own wife. I don't know that he actually married her. He was just living with her. So John the Baptist told Herod, who was a ruler, that he was doing something wrong.
Yeah. People hate that when you tell them.
People hate that when you tell them, they're doing something wrong.
If you ever want to get somebody on your bad side, tell them what they're doing wrong, and that'll start it right up. So the interesting thing is this dance that the daughter of Herodias did. Yeah. People always have these different ideas of this dance that must have been so either sexual or extremely well done or whatever your concept is. He made this promise, and then because he made this promise and she asked for the head of John the Baptist, he had to go through with it. So no matter what the dance was, that we can all have our thoughts on what we think made him make this promise to half the kingdom or whatever. That's crazy in the first place. But whatever it was, he made that statement. And then when she asked for that, all of a sudden, this powerful man is too weak to say, oh, no, I'm not taking somebody's life for this. No, yeah. Instead, and he's not all of a sudden, he's all righteous because he did steal his brother's wife. I mean, it's not like this is a righteous guy saying, oh, no, I gave you my word, I got to stick to it. No, yeah. It was all ego. It was all weak. He was a weak leader. He couldn't say, you know what, that request is out of the question. I mean, I know that I said what I said, but I'm not taking somebody's life. That's all he had to say. But no, too weak of a leader in that sense. His ego, because everybody was around listening to him going, ooh, are you going to go through with this? Come on now, and keep your word, And he could have said, no, there's no way I'm taking somebody's life for a dance, right? But yeah, it just shows you who this person is. Even though he was a bad person, he was also a weak person. In the sense of he was driven by his ego and what people thought about him.
Yeah, that says that in verse 9.
Yeah. Yes. That's where I got it.
He commanded it to be given because of his oaths.
Yeah.
Because he made a promise.
His oaths, because he's so righteous that he has to keep his promises. I'm like, no, not even.
And then and because of his dinner guests. Yeah, that's what it says in the Bible. Yeah. Because of his dinner guests, because of the people he was in front of. And John just made the comment, she was also his niece and his brother's wife. Herodias. Herodias' daughter was his niece. Yeah. And Herodias was his brother's wife. So yeah.
It gets a very Jerry Springer kind of episodes. Yeah.
Very Jerry Springer.
Yeah.
In other places, this is told in other places, right? This story is told in other places because we know from another place in the Bible that he promised her up to half of his kingdom.
Yeah, that's where I was saying that.
And I don't know, I don't know if that's just like maybe it was a saying, like you say things like, oh, I'd give my right arm to do that.
Yeah.
We're not giving our right arms.
No.
It's just a saying. But he said he would give her up to half of his kingdom. I would take the cash, man. You could have hired somebody.
Yeah, it was
had John the Baptist killed if that's what you were looking for, honey.
Yeah. But then it also shows the state of mind that Herodias was in for her to tell her daughter, that's what you're going to ask for.
Right.
But she really did not like John the Baptist. Because if you've ever, like I said earlier, if you've ever confronted anybody and told them what they're doing wrong, especially in the biblical world, you tell somebody that what they're doing is a sin or against God, people turn and they get angry. And we've seen that. I was a preacher's kid all of my life, and we seen it when my dad would preach against something that someone was living in the church. That was their lifestyle. They would try to have my dad removed or fired or whatever you do, to get rid of a pastor. Yeah, if they don't like that you mentioned the drug dealing that they're doing, which is one of the cases, we brought out that somebody was dealing drugs in the church, and they didn't like that. I mean, we were getting rid of them, but so they tried to get rid of us. So yeah, it really turns. Irene says hi. Hi, Irene. Karen put in there where we're at, especially for Irene and others that's just joining us here. We're Matthew 14. Thanks, Karen.
There you go. Right.
So good. We're ready?
I love it. Yep, we're ready. All right, so that was, I think I also just want to mention that it says that he was grieved in verse 9 in Matthew 14:9. Yeah. So it seemed like Herod didn't want to kill John the Baptist.
Yeah.
And so that, while that's great to know, it makes the whole situation sadder, doesn't it? Because it's like he didn't want to kill him, but yet he did. Yeah. But he did anyway, and it's like, wow, that's kind of lame.
Yeah.
And but another just the idea is that you learn from his mistakes, right? Don't put yourself in a situation where it would be too embarrassing to do the right thing. And that's definitely the situation he was in. So, all
right, I think we made it down to verse 13, right?
Yep.
13.
So Matthew 14:13. Matthew 14:13 starts like this. Now when Jesus heard about John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. And when the people heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate, and the hour is already late. So send the crowds away, that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking upward toward heaven, he blessed the food, and breaking the loaves, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. There were about 5,000 men who ate, besides women and children. So you know this story. The 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and Jesus feeding the 5,000. Right. This is one of Jesus's famous miracles. I think there's a few. He's like walking on water, turns water into wine. He feeds the 5,000. He raises a young lady from death. He raises Lazarus from the dead. Like there's some miracles that just I don't know. They hit all the buttons, and so so they get talked a lot about in Sunday school. But here we are as adults, and we're reading this story. And John says this story is also in Mark 6:18 through 29. Yeah, we learn different things in Mark. Like it was actually a little boy's lunch, that was the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And so it's amazing. I mean, I know we've heard about it a million times, and maybe you're not in awe of the story, but if you think about 5,000 people and feeding 5,000 people, maybe that as an adult, and having to feed other adults, 5,000 adults plus women and children, that freaks me out. So so that brings home the the gravitas of this miracle.
So there's a lot that we can unpack in just this section. There's a lot of questions, a lot that we can answer, a lot we just can't. Like you're saying, we know this little boy based on the Mark telling the story.
Yeah.
We know that there was a little boy that brought some food. So why did he have that food? Did his mom pack him a lunch? Did he say, hey, this looks like it's going to be a long day. I'm going into the refrigerator and grab some food before I go. No, they didn't have refrigerators then. But for some reason, this kid had the fish and the loaves. So it seems like the only person that was prepared for a journey. And so he knew he's not coming back home soon, the way I look at it. But there's another thing that we always overlook. Who brought the baskets? See, the fish is one thing, but somebody brought those baskets, because we know that they had 12 baskets left of things left over. So those are the ones. I don't know that one. I know people. I've heard different people's opinions, but if these people were following Jesus, people were carrying baskets. So, and I know that was in the culture. I get that. I've heard that before. But if you're at some point you just drop the, yeah, I guess. But they didn't have any food in those baskets. But maybe clothes. Who knows? So anyway, so that's just the way my brain works. I think of these little things. To me, it seemed like Jesus was trying to get away. His cousin had just been put to death. This great man, John the Baptist, in a gruesome way. There's something that Jesus knows that others did not really understand at that time, and that is John the Baptist went to paradise. So Jesus knows where he's at. He knows that John left here, but he's not dead. He's in paradise right now, and that's great. That's a great place to be. And knowing that eventually Jesus is going to die on the cross, raise him from the dead, and he's going to be in that first group that goes to heaven. So that's all in the plan. So Jesus knows that. But at the same time, Jesus is still human. And this is someone he highly respected, a great prophet, a great man of God. Yeah, and cousin. And it seems like Jesus just wanted to get alone on the human side of him, to just be able to maybe just process this, to me. But then this crowd comes around, and they're like wanting to see Jesus because he's doing these miracles, he's doing all these teachings. So they're following him. And in this area that he's in, it's where the water is. It's probably 8 miles across. So even if, side this way, not that way. So they can see, if you're over there, they can see and know, okay, so we could just walk around and catch up with him. So it's not like he's hiding from them, because he knows they can see him and follow him. So this group just goes around and follows him, right? So this is the kind of things that I think, okay, Jesus didn't say, hey, I'm trying to get away from you people, leave me. No, he goes ahead and goes out and says, this place is secluded. This is where he stayed in this. But Jesus said to them, they do not need to go, because the disciples are wanting to send them home because it's getting late and they've been there all day. They do not need to go. Give them something to eat. And I know we got some comments going, so let me catch up on that before we get to this part.
Yeah, so Karen says, I love how Jesus says you feed the people. Jesus would probably tell us to have compassion and feed those who are hungry. Yes, absolutely, Karen. John said he was talking about the king and John the Baptist and the beheading. He was talking about that in Mark 6. That's when
yeah.
Thank you, John. Thanks. I was thinking you were talking about feeding the 5,000. Yeah. So anyway, so thank you, John. That's the Herodias and John the Baptist story there in Mark 6, 18 through 19. And then Rich says, hey, it's good to see you. And there you go. Happy birthday to Grace. So
yeah,
Howdy, Rich. Thanks for popping on.
Cheers. Big 21 today.
Big
All
21.
right, so back to the thing is, okay, so Jesus getting away, then all of a sudden the people follow him. So then he just goes along with it. The disciples are saying, hey, send these people back to their villages so they can buy food for themselves before it gets late, and whatever. And then he says, they do not need to go. Give them something to eat. And this is a great representation, I believe, a great representation of the church and our relationship with Christ. I think this is an example for us, and it also probably is an example of how we really respond when God calls us to do things. I believe that Jesus is going to call the church to do things that we think that we cannot do, we cannot handle. It's way beyond our reach. We don't have enough resources. We don't have enough whatever, volunteers. We don't have enough. And I think that's an excuse every time. It would be great to be able to do this, but we don't have enough money. Go to any board meeting and you're probably going to hear those words. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough volunteers. We don't have enough. We don't have enough. This right here is a great example, because he says, they do not get, you give them something to eat. And then when they complain and say, we only have these 5 loaves and 2 fish, he says, bring those to me. And it's like, bring whatever you have, your resources that you do have, the little bit that you have, your willingness to do what God wants. Maybe that's it. Maybe you have the desire to do ministry, but you don't have all the resources. Bring that to Jesus. Whatever you have, even if it's just your desire to do it, bring it. He then multiplies it. And then he doesn't multiply it and just hand it to the people. He says, here, I'll show you guys how this works. Bring me those fish. And then he starts handing it out. No, it's like what Karen was talking about. He commands them to do it. Well, what is he commanding them to do? Be part of what I'm doing. I'm going to bless it. You're going to hand it out. Mm-hmm. You're the church. You're representing me. I'm providing to you. You go do the ministry. And I think it's a perfect illustration of us as the church. He's using the disciples to make that, and in this perfect example of feeding the people. These are the sheep that we're always talked about, the sheep and the lamb. When we hear that throughout, well, that's what he's talking about. Jesus is the head of the church. He's the head of the body. And he provides to us. He's our provider. And then we go out and do the work. So I think we just study that. Like I said, there's a lot in there, but that's just one of those things that I pick out of this that just says, this is a great example for us to just always don't whine and complain because we don't have enough. Take what you have to Jesus and let him bless it, and then go do what he says to do.
Yeah, so I don't. So what do you guys get out of this story? As an adult,
it can't be different than what I just said. No, it can't be.
There's
probably a million different things you can pull out of it.
I think there's a lot of different applications to this story as we read it as adults, and understanding the time and the place, and Jesus was mourning, the death of his cousin and a well-respected friend, and so what does that say to you? That he felt compassion for the people and started healing them and feeding them. And so, it's great to read these stories as adults, and then we get to see like what it is that God is saying to us today. Or we're going to read this next one. Like what does the next story say to you? Because definitely, it, like I was saying, it surely seems like I get different things out of it, but definitely I get from this story, getting just what Pastor Paul was saying is like bring your little bit and let him expand on whatever you bring to him. So,
and if you were studying this, just to throw some ideas out there, it's what did the 12 full baskets represent? I mean, that's something we probably won't cover that today, but there were these leftover broken pieces, enough for 12 baskets after feeding the 5,000. Which we know there was more than 5,000 people. Because there was women and children.
10 to 15,000.
And then, but yeah, because it says 5,000 men, besides women and children. So we got 12 baskets. What does that mean? What's the significance of the fish and the bread? I mean, you can just really look into the story, and it's just so much more there. If you really wanted to study it, those are some good things. Or you can make comments if you already have an answer to those.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's enough for dissecting that.
It's a great story. Let's go to the
12 tribes of Jewish people. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
12 baskets, 12 tribes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
12 disciples.
Yeah.
Yep. 12
Each
apostles.
disciple got a basket. Each tribe got a
to-go box.
Yeah.
Their to-go basket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, you're definitely right, Karen.
It could represent that. It's
represent that.
There's something that's a whole study just on what that could represent, because it does. All these numbers, all these things have something to represent in the scripture.
Yeah, all represent something. Yeah, Jesus doesn't waste a word here. So let's go on to Matthew 14:22. So Matthew 14:22 tells another famous story about Jesus, and so let's go ahead and read that together. Matthew 14:22. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowds away. As he sent the crowds away, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to walk to you on the water." And he said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son."
So before we start talking about that one, let's go with what John mentioned from the last section there. I think that maybe other people had food but was not willing to give, just as in today's church.
Yeah.
The concept's right. It's not scriptural, so it's nothing in the scripture that says that. But saying that, there are a ton of people who believe that back in that time, the culture would put fish, loaves of bread inside their clothing for these journeys or for walking. This is what they believe. It's not a scriptural thing. It's just people trying to. The idea of, I'm not saying John's doing this, but the idea of what these other beliefs are, when they teach this, they're trying to take away from the miracle. The biblical story is perfect as it is. There was these fish and these loaves, and God blessed it. Boom, end of story. These other people that are trying to say, "Oh, there was other people had food in their clothes, and then when they saw the little boy give it, he was a great example, so they all started pulling out this food." There's over 5,000 people. There's not enough food, even if 1,000 of them had food. I mean, there's just not enough food. I mean, it's not going to work. The math's not going to add up. So, and how many people are carrying that much fish? And I don't know if you've ever fed 5,000, or it would be, like we said, it's multiple times that.
Yeah. Because
of the women and children. John himself has cooked for what was it, 2,000 people? So 2,000 hamburgers in a day. I mean, there's a lot of food going through just with the 2,000 we were serving. So you can imagine what's going on here. So there could have been people that had food and wouldn't share it, but not to the belief of this other belief, which is there was no miracle done. Everybody just started all of a sudden saw this little boy give his fish and bread out, so now they're all doing it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely don't believe that. But could other people have had some food? Maybe. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people
Well,
there.
if there were moms, then
Yeah.
they, they brought granola bars for their kids or fruit
Yeah.
snacks.
So,
kidding.
but the disciples
But
said
they brought snacks
all
for
they
their
could
children.
find. So the disciples obviously went around looking for people that would have had food with them, and the only food that they came to Jesus with was those fish and loaves. So it's a good point, though. I mean, it's because you got to think like this. You got to think all these people came out here with nothing. I mean, seriously, but it's like we were saying earlier about the reason we canceled last night. When things happen rapidly, all the things don't fall into place. So when people saw Jesus and they began to follow him, they just started following him. I mean, they didn't go and say, hey, we have to prepare meals, we have to do this. They just, hey, Jesus is going that way. Let's go, kind of thing. So with that in mind, so now we can get back to what you were just read.
Walking on the water.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you, John. I think you're right. I think you're right that I'm sure there probably were the people that had some snacks and either didn't give it or maybe they didn't know, but if they were asked, they didn't give it. But that's why that little boy gets so much credit because he did give it. All right, so walking on the water. So he's saying that after this great miracle, that's when he puts them on the boat. Yeah. Sends them out in the Sea of Galilee. And then he goes up the mountain to pray. And so again, he's showing us by example of taking time alone, taking time to pray by yourself. But
I'll stop you right there. What is going on right now?
Storm.
Before that.
Feeding
They just fed 5,000 people or more. This crowd's been following. I don't know if you've ever did events or any kind of outreaches. They're worn out by now. They are tired. They are worn out. I mean, our events that take us from 6 o'clock in the morning till the evening, we're done. We're tired. We're just to that point. Jesus doesn't make an excuse. He goes and prays. How many of us are worn out and tired and dealing with people all day long go and spend time to pray before you do anything else? No, we go home and crash or nope, not Jesus. He's showing us there's no excuse. You've done all this. You still go pray. That was more important to him than getting rest in the sense of like we would do. So it was rest to him then.
Yeah, it was rest to him, but how awesome that we have that example that he went and prayed by himself.
Karen says you got Karen?
Yeah, when Peter looked at the storm, that was when he began to sing, "Don't take your eyes off of Jesus in life's storms, because Jesus is with you. Have faith." Amen. Amen. That's exactly what it says. We do talk about, Peter was a little crazy in the fact that he spoke first and seemed to think later. He was one of those outspoken people that says what he thinks, and so we tease him about that. We tease him about just his impetuousness, but he was also incredibly brave, and he would often ask the questions that people were afraid to ask. And here, out of all of those guys in the boat, he was the one to get out of the boat. And so we give him a lot of credit for getting out of the boat, because that was a big thing. But then, like Karen said, but then he looked around to the circumstance, to the terrifying. He's like, what did I just do? I'm sure you've been there with Jesus. You take a leap of faith and you're like, what did I just do? But yeah, you're right, Karen. All he had to do was put his eyes back on Jesus. And
too late then. Boom. So John wanted to finish up what he was talking about earlier, and just re-explaining that he was just showing the greed of the people not willing to give up their food. And I get it in church. God blesses us with finances, but everybody gets all upset if you ask them to tithe it, But it's not really us asking; it's God asking because God gave it to you. So yeah,
God will
so
do
no,
it.
good point. That's really good. Okay, so let's go back to just to break down this little story. If you've ever heard Norman Moore preach this sermon, which he preached this sermon just before we rented out the Rose Bowl Stadium, and it was such at our church in Stanton. He preached it, and it was such an impact on us. I wrote about it in my book, Faith of a Mustard Seed, because that sermon was at the right time, the right place for us, and I'll never forget it. And I called him up and I said, "I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this sermon," and he gave me permission to. So that was really good. I love this. I think he's the only person that's ever brought this details out that I've ever heard of, but it's really good. But as doing that, a couple of things. This is not Norman's part of it, but if you read in Mark, it kind of tells a story. It's something interesting to me. Jesus went to pray, and then he prayed for a long time, so long enough that these guys were way, way beyond him. And it's in the fourth watch, which is nearly morning time. So this is very late. That's the concept that just blows my mind. They were up all day and then here all night, and then he goes out and walks on the water. But in the book of Mark, it says he didn't intend to stop. He was going to meet them on the other side. He was going to pass them by in a storm as he's walking on water. I mean, that's something that we don't get here, but just to think that Jesus wasn't going out to rescue them in the storm. He was walking to the other side. That was, that's another one of those things. You can study that. Wow, Jesus was just going to pass them by. Because why? He wasn't worried about the storm. The storm was no big. But, it could be other reasons too, but that's just my concept. So the fourth watch of the night, that's coming up on morning there. When this is another one that catches me. The disciples' first reaction was, "It's a ghost." I don't know what the idea of ghosts were back then, but how many adults do we know today that the first thing they say is, "It's a ghost"? And just for that to happen with these grown men in a boat in the middle of the water in a storm, to think it's a ghost because walking on the water, it's like you didn't want to think it was an angel, or you didn't want to think anything else. It was a ghost. So that, to me, that's a whole study in itself too, just to find out what did people back then believe about ghosts. Now we know that when Peter, no, they said angel back then. No, I was going to say that when Peter knocked on the door, they thought it was his angel, but that's his angel, not a ghost. So that would be interesting to see. But further down, this is the story of Peter, and this is where Norman Moore talks about this. Jesus says to them when they're thinking, "Oh, it's a ghost," and they're crying out in fear. That's another one. Crying out in fear. And then Jesus says, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter responded and said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come." And Jesus said, "Come." I mean, like Tina was saying, this you kind of do these things and you realize what you said. You're like, "Oops, what did I just do?" Peter, remember how many people were in the boat? All the disciples?
Yeah.
Only one's doing this. Even though we put down Peter, even though we think that this guy has an ego the size of Texas, or whatever you want to say about him. I mean, he's always putting his foot in his mouth. This guy did it. He said to Jesus, "If it's you, then tell me to come, because I want to do that too. I want to walk on water." And Jesus says, "Come."
Yeah.
Peter gets out of the boat, begins to walk on the water. There's only two people ever to walk on water. Ever. It's Peter and Jesus. Peter, I mean, he's just like us. It's Jesus we can understand, but Peter, so he did it, and he's going, and then he gets there, and with that, remember the storm's still there. The storm hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
And then the waves and everything, and like Karen said, he took his eyes off Jesus
Mm-hmm.
and started looking at the storm, but then he began to sink. And this is where Norman Moore pulled this out that I don't think anybody else, I've never heard this. When he began to sink, he cried out to Jesus, and the Bible, read it for yourself. It says that Jesus ran to him. It ran and ran and ran to him, right? No, it doesn't say that. It says he reached out.
Mm-hmm.
He just reached out. He didn't have to walk. He didn't have to run. All it says is Jesus reached out.
Mm-hmm.
And so Norman Moore does this amazing thing. He has somebody come up, and I reach out my hand. He reaches out his hand, and you grab hands. He goes, that's how close Peter was to Jesus while he was freaking out, while he was in fear. It's like the closer you get to Jesus, Satan does everything to get you off course. Just imagine how close you are to Jesus when you begin to give up.
Yeah.
When you begin to take your eyes off of Jesus and start looking around at, oh, well, I can't do this. Well, guess what? You're just an arm's length away from being there. So go ahead and go all the way. Meet Jesus all the way. I thought John put something, but that was the last one. All right. So anyway, when he got, and I'll just make two more comments on this, and I'm done. I promise. The one comment he made to Peter: "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" That's to Peter, who just walked on the water. Got out of the boat, walked on the water. That's to Peter, the guy that did it.
Mm-hmm.
You know who I don't want to be? The ones he didn't talk to when he got back in the boat. It doesn't, I mean, he just got back in the boat and the wind stopped.
Yeah.
I don't want to be one of those guys who Jesus was walking on the water. I had an opportunity and I did nothing. I mean, Peter got a little, hey, why'd you stop doubting? You were so close.
Yeah.
Those guys in the boat, nothing.
Yeah.
And guess what? They're also not listed as ever walking on water. I'm just saying.
That's it.
I mean, you want to do what God can do in your life, go do it. Don't be a person that just sits in the boat.
Yeah, Peter reacted in faith, with faith. John says, that just shows us what we can do if we keep our eyes on Jesus and not the thing on what we see in the flesh. That's it. Not the fear. Not the, the fact that you're overwhelmed or anything like that. It's like if you can remain, if you keep your eyes on Jesus, it's pretty powerful.
So I'll tell you this to add to that thing, because remember I said I started this thing out by saying it was what Norman Moore preached right before we went to the Rose Bowl. What I didn't say was that Tina and I, we went broke. We had no money left over.
That's the same as broke.
That's true. Yeah, it's kind of like it. Yeah. So I was just doubly explaining it so you'd know what I meant.
Double down.
So we had no money and we were broke. We were losing both our houses in foreclosure at some time in that. We our daughter had lead poisoning. Our daughter had enamel. She was born with no enamel on her teeth, so we had to spend money on that. It was like tons of money that we were supposed to spend on that. Anyway, to say nothing was going right. And just a week away from the Rose Bowl, they start calling us and telling us we owe more money and we don't have any more money. And we're like, we can't do this event. And just to have Norman Moore preach this, it's like, no, just, you got out of the boat. Now don't take your eyes off Jesus. And sure enough, we finished. God did the work that he called us to do. He took us all the way to there. But it was, we saw the waves, and we started taking our eyes off Jesus several times. But we got back, and I think he did. I think he reached out and pulled us back up and probably said, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt?
Gotcha. Why did you doubt? Yeah, this whole story is in Mark chapter 6 as well.
Is our story in there?
No, our the story of Jesus walking on the water. Yeah. Interestingly enough, though, in Mark chapter 6, it does not talk about Peter getting out of the boat and walking on the water. So, and again, like, people say, oh, one one place in the Bible talks about it, one other place in the Bible doesn't talk about it, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. That just means that they had different perspective, and that Mark decided not to. Mark was a very much he writes shorter.
Yeah.
And he writes just like the highlights.
Immediately. It's immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately after that. Immediately after.
I mean, he'll push like 10 stories into one chapter. He's just doing he's like the top 10 list, and so he just did not write about that. But he did say this. He said in Mark 6:51, which we're in Matthew 14, but in Mark 6:51 it says, "Then he got into the boat with them," meaning Jesus, "and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished, for they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened." And so again, this kind of shows that, like, we love miracles. We love a good miracle. Give me a good miracle. We're always praying for a miracle. But miracles don't often change people, because like you see one miracle and then they want another one. Like, that's not enough. And so, I don't know, if you whatever, you win the lotto, you win $100. Well, now you want 200. It's like we've and God knows how we are.
Yep.
We always want more. All right, so
well, I was going to add one more thing. Is
sure.
And John also mentions it in John 6, and he really keeps it short. And he said his disciples went down to the sea, and after getting into the boat, they started to cross the sea, but it had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. So he leaves out a lot of details in that. And then he said, in addition, the sea began getting rough because of the strong wind, which was blowing. And he tells the distance they went, about 25 or 30 stadia, S-T-A-D-I-A, however you want to say that. And they saw Jesus walking on the sea, coming near the boat. They were frightened. And he said, "It is I, do not be afraid." So he didn't tell any of this. He just talks about Jesus walking on the water. But that's what John's point is. John's just showing Jesus walked on the water. That's the main point of this. It's who Jesus is. So they all tell it a little different. But so that's why you put these together and you get more details. Like, man, you can make a movie out of this. So anyway, so John tells it, Mark tells it, Matthew tells it. I'm not sure about Luke. Anybody know that? Does Luke tell the story?
I don't know. Maybe you guys could look that up for us. Does Luke tell the story about Jesus walking on the water? I don't know that off the top of my head.
So it is an interesting story that's really good. It says, John says, "That's why Jesus said, 'You are blessed because you see, but I say blessed are the ones that believe and have not seen yet.'"
There's some faith.
Like it.
Right there. Yes. Thank you, John. So we're going to finish up this chapter 15. We just have 3 more verses here. So chapter 15 of Matthew, I'm going to start in 34. So Matthew 15, 34. Matthew 14. Matthew 14. Let me just say that again. Matthew 14, 34. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. I don't know if I'm saying that.
Say it with confidence. It works.
And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent word into all the surrounding district and brought to him all who were sick. And they implored him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. As many as touched it were cured. So again, this is just the end of the story then. I don't know that the disciples have had any sleep at this point.
And Jesus either. And it's interesting
probably
because
early in the morning.
All these people, the news is traveling about him. I mean, he's become the popular guy where he won't be able to move through the crowds at all anymore. Everywhere he goes, paparazzi.
Yeah, I mean, he's recognized as a as a great healer.
Yeah.
But the people hadn't really realized who he was, who he truly was, right? I mean, yes, he was able to heal. They came for physical healing, but they weren't coming for the real gift that he offered, which was spiritual healing. They came to prolong their lives on earth, but they didn't come yet to secure their eternal lives. So.
Yeah. Well, that was a good chapter. I like it.
Yeah, if you the fringe, they're talking about the fringe in Matthew 14:36.
We can sell you fringe if you send us $15. No, I'm just kidding.
We'll bless it and send it to you.
Yeah, we'll pray over it.
That's a televangelist.
Yeah, don't fall for that stuff.
No.
Just there's no. It was the fact that it was Jesus. It had nothing to do with the cloth, the clothing, the fringes, any of that stuff. It's the fact that it's their faith in Jesus and the fact that Jesus has mercy and healing them.
Yeah, you can also
not the clothing.
You can bless your bathrobe. You've got power in the name of Jesus. So, but Jewish men wore tassels or fringe on the lower edges of their robes according to God's command. This is Deuteronomy 22. And so by the time Jesus rolled around, these tassels were kind of seen as a representation of holiness, like you were gods. You were gods if you had some pretty tassels on the bottom of your robe. And so it's kind of a natural thing that people would reach out and want to touch his robe, or they say like the edge of your robe, which would be the fringy part. But as we talked about before about the woman with the issue of blood, and she reached out and she touched the hem of his garment, the healing didn't come from the garment.
Yep.
The healing didn't come from the garment, right? It came from.
And Jesus made clear. He's like, he felt that go through him. And so, yeah.
It's not about the garment. It's about the faith.
Yeah.
She had faith. Yeah. He said, woman, your faith has healed you.
Right.
And so, that's what I'm saying. You could touch a bathrobe. You need Jesus. It's not about fringe, although it's lovely on a nice leather jacket. Not about fringe.
I just want to tell you guys this because you can't see it. There's, even though our counter says there's like a few people on one, our counter is right from the server. So there's something wrong with our counter. There's nearly 50 people watching right now. So just so you know, I've seen them the whole time. I just the counter's a little off. I gotta find out why that is. But on the server counter, there's like 50 of you out there. So thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
I know you're on the websites and stuff, and you don't see all the chat features because that counter's correct. I see that counter. That counter's correct, but the other one is off. And yeah, that's cool. I love being surprised like that. But I saw you guys earlier. I just didn't say anything because I looked at the server because the counter just looked off today. So thank you guys for that was
Matthew 14.
Matthew 14, and we guess which one we'll be in next time. Matthew 15. Imagine that. All right. Well, thanks you guys.